Hello and welcome to the Authentic Freedom Virtual Church. My name is Lori Lumbie and I'm the pastor and spiritual director of this online community. Let me read to you for a moment from our mission statement. We are a community of men and women who consider Jesus to be our teacher, while honoring the spiritual truths inherent within all sacred traditions. We recognize the divine as that which is at once outside of us, within us, and present within all of creation, and which can be acknowledged by any name, image, or presence. We believe in the inherent potential of all human beings to become self-actualized and acknowledge the spiritual journey as a formative tool in this endeavor. We believe in the law of love and seek to know more fully the love of the divine that dwells within us and which seeks to be known in the world through us in service to the betterment of the world. Thank you for joining us. The theme for this week's virtual church session is economic justice. In the reading from the Acts of the Apostles, which is the first reading for this Sunday's service, we learn about how the early Christians implemented Jesus' mission and call to serve. And the unique way in which they implemented that call was to facilitate a community in which all wealth and resources were shared commonly among all people. And what that meant was that those who had more shared with those who had less. And what this created in the early Christian community was an opportunity, number one, for sharing, number two, for receiving, and number three, it ensured that all people's needs were being met in abundance, that their needs were being met not only for survival, but also to be able to thrive. And what to thrive means is to be able to discover, cultivate, and share the uniquely creative way in which God has gifted us to find meaning and purpose in our lives. This reading from the Acts of the Apostles specifically touches on one of the core principles of authentic freedom. Authentic freedom is a process, a protocol, a set of principles that I have developed to help facilitate self-actualization in adults. And in authentic freedom, we take a look at what are the fears, specifically what are the spiritual fears that keep us separate from God, or I should say, keep us believing in the false perception of separation from God. And how do those fears drive our compulsive or non-loving behaviors? So taking a look at this week's reading, we have an opportunity to see a community that has learned to transcend one of those core fears. And the core fear that we're specifically addressing here is the fear that there is not enough. That is the first core fear in the authentic freedom process. The fear that there is not enough money, time, resources, clothing, shelter, safety, love, that there are not enough things. When we believe in the fear that there is not enough, then we are driven to look outside of ourselves for the fulfillment or the remedy to that fear. Unfortunately, what we ultimately discover is that the remedy to that fear is not outside of us, but is instead in our intimate relationship with God. When we turn our attention away from materialism, the acquisition of things, power, control, status, money, when we turn our attention from an outside search for remedying that fear and instead turn our attention towards God through our mindfulness practice, through meditation, through creative expression, we find that ultimately that fear that there is not enough is really unfounded. That indeed God provides for all of our needs, that all of our needs for food, clothing, shelter, the resources that we need to discover and cultivate our gifts are all there in abundance. The problem is that when we are entertaining the fear that there is not enough, then we often go into behaviors of gluttony. And what gluttony is, from the perspective of authentic freedom, is the acquisition of too much or depriving ourselves of the things that we need to survive and to thrive. So if we as a Western culture want to shift the way in which we are currently living, Western culture is in a state right now where the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and the middle class is very slowly, actually quickly disappearing. And the reason this is happening is that those that have more are not sharing with those that have less. And there is not a process within our culture that is mindful of how do we provide for the needs of all? How do we make sure that everybody's needs for food, clothing, shelter, and the resources they need to thrive are actually there for them? God provided us with a world that is abundant in resources. There is more than enough of everything that we need to survive as a planet, as a species. There is more than enough for every man, woman, and child to have exactly what they need to survive and to thrive. The challenge is to overcome our individual fear that there is not enough, to indulge in mindfulness, meditation, creative expression, and spiritual practices that help us to remember that there is enough, so that we are no longer compelled to search outside of ourselves for that which will remedy that fear. We are no longer compelled to indulge in excess or deprivation, and we are more than happy to share with what we have. So the invitation this week is to be mindful of where in our own lives are we afraid that there's not enough. And instead of indulging that fear, instead of indulging the behaviors that arise out of that fear, how can we take time to be with God? To restore ourselves to our natural state, which is one of peacefulness and contentment. How can we turn our attention towards God to cultivate that place of inner peace and trust, arriving at a place where we know that all of our needs are being met, so that we can work together in creating a system of economic justice, where the needs of all men, women, and children on this planet will be met, that all of their needs for food, clothing, shelter, and their needs to cultivate an inner place of creativity and fulfillment, that all of those needs will be met. That process, however, begins with us. In order to make a dramatic change in our Western culture from materialism to economic and social justice, we have to start with ourselves. And so I invite you this week to be mindful of the places where you are afraid that there is not enough. And when you are tempted to entertain those fears, instead to turn yourself towards God, to go into mindfulness, to go into your meditation practice, to go into your creative expression. Remember that place of peace and trust, and know that all of your needs are being met. And in closing today, I want to share with you an Aramaic mantra that is specifically designed to help us remember that all of our needs are being abundantly met by our loving and generous God, and that we are called to share what we have with those who do not. Havlan lachma desun kenan yalmana, Havlan lachman desun kenan yalmana, Havlan lachman desun kenan yalmana, Havlan lachman desun kenan yalmana. Thank you for joining us for this Authentic Freedom Virtual Church. And if you found today's service to be meaningful and supportive of your own journey towards self-actualization, of healing and expansiveness, I invite you to make a donation to Authentic Freedom Ministries. And you can do that either at the bottom of this page or through the donate button on the side of my website. Thank you again, and have a great week of remembering that all of your needs are being abundantly met.